Okay, so as Anna said, this is an informal presentation. Even though I'm dressed formally, I'm doing that because my boss is in the back. But it is an informal presentation, and so if you want to ask a question at any time, go ahead. And this really isn't very long. I think we have maybe 16 slides and a short movie if you want to watch, a short propaganda movie from NIAID. Tom and I are both of us are with the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And so most of what we talk about is going to focus on them in specific, but a lot of it's going to be general for the other institutes. Essentially, all of the scientists who work directly for the federal government running a lab at NIH. And most of them are based in Bethesda on the NIH campus. There are other campuses, like in Montana, the Rocky Mountain Labs. There are campuses down in North Carolina, and there's a couple others, small ones, scattered throughout the country also. But the vast bulk of intramural research is done at the Bethesda campus. And I'm not going to talk too much about the intramural program because, in fact, you're probably already very familiar with it. They have postdoctoral positions there. They have some graduate students who work there. It's essentially set up like a big academic research institute. You have tenure track positions, equivalent to an assistant, associate professor. You have lab chief positions, which are equivalent to kind of a chair of a department, although it doesn't really work quite that way. Again, very familiar with how things run in the academic world. The big difference is, of course, and if you haven't already heard this, is at NIH, when you work there, you don't write grants, okay? You get your money directly from the federal government. Labs are reviewed on a regular basis, and that can determine how well funded your lab is, but you don't write grants when you work there. And you do very little teaching. Teaching's totally optional. You spend almost all of your time doing science. And what I always tell everybody I meet is one of the greatest places to do a postdoctoral fellowship is on the NIH campus. And again, although some postdoctoral fellowships are advertised, a lot of them are not. And a lot of them you get by writing letters to specific PIs and specific institutes. So if you find somebody's lab, if you want to work on the NIH campus as a postdoc, look at the labs that are there and find a lab that's doing work that you're interested in and basically write the PI a letter and say, I'd like to work in your lab, this is why. And then you hopefully, if they have a position, you can get a postdoctoral position there. The other thing to keep in mind with the intramural program is that microbiologists are not concentrated in any one institute. So, for instance, I did my postdoctoral work in the National Cancer Institute, which actually has quite a lot of microbiologists there doing basic bacteriology. There's also a lot of microbiologists in the Child Health and Human Development Institute, again, doing a lot of really cool basic bacteriology. And virology, for that matter. And it's the same for a number. And NIAID also has some intramural microbiologists working for them. But don't necessarily let the name of the institute sway you in whether you're going to look there for a position as a microbiologist, either as a postdoctoral position or even if you want to go to a tenure or tenure track position. Okay? Let me see. So what was my next slide then? So then coming up, the extramural program. So that's what I'm going to tell you a little bit about now because it's probably the least familiar to a lot of people, what we do in the extramural program. One thing to keep in mind, NIH last year got somewhere around $27 billion from Congress for everything, a lot of money. Of that, NIAID got, I don't remember, how many billion did they get? You remember? I don't know. It's not like 7, 8, 9 billion. They got a lot of money. They're the second largest institute to the Cancer Institute. They get the most money. But NIAID is catching up. The vast bulk of that money, so 15% of that money goes to the NIAID intramural program. 85% of it goes outside, gets awarded as grants and contracts to principal investigators all around the country and, in fact, around the world. So the vast bulk of the money that NIAID gets goes off campus and goes out to other people. So following that money and determining who gets that money is a really important part of NIAID's mission. Now, there are kind of I can't remember if I put 4 or 3 general career paths at the PhD level. Oh, let me back up a step. Most of the positions I'm going to talk about for extramural research all require PhDs or MDs or equivalent doctoral degrees. There are also some positions for people with Masters of Public Health and registered nurses, but in general you need a PhD for these extramural positions. Excuse me. So there are 4 broad categories. You have scientific review administrators, which is what I do. You have program officers, which is what Tom does now. He was formerly a scientific review administrator. Now he's in the program office. You have policy officers, and then you have people who do all kinds of kind of in-between things, congressional liaisons. There's a whole broad range, a whole broad spectrum of job possibilities in the extramural program at NIAID. So let me start by let me start by trying to remember what my next slide was. So we talk about that. There's lots of jobs. What? Nah, that's going to take too long. It's already 1:15. No, I mean, it wasn't that complicated to talk. It's just I spent so much time finding the nice template and finding the nice transitions, and I wanted to show them. Let's see. Okay, so let me talk about what scientific review does, okay? So each institute, I shouldn't say that. That's not true for all. So there's 27 institutes and centers. Oh, so we might get an extension cord. There's 27 institutes and centers. A lot of those institutes have their own scientific review program. So NIAID, we have our own program. Our job is to work with proposals and applications that come in for specific requests that NIAID does. The same is true for the Cancer Center and some of the other institutes. There's also the very big Center for Scientific Review, which does the vast majority of applications that come to NIH. And they have several hundred scientific review administrators who work there to organize the review of pretty much your standard R01 grants that come into the Institute, the 70,000 that come in every year. They organize the review for that. We're much more specific in the reviews we organize. So what my job is, well, actually, I'll start with Tom. People in Tom's job, what they do is they say, okay, look, there's this unmet need in the community. We need to have a focused contract or a cooperative agreement that supplies animal models to the community for disease X, Y, and Z. So they write up a request for proposal or applications, they publish this, and then people respond to those, send in and say, okay, look, this is how I'm going to do the work you want us to do. They send me that, or they send us that. My job is to look at these proposals, figure out what expertises are needed for these proposals, what scientific expertise, and then to identify the scientists who might be good at reviewing these. So you find the scientists who are good at reviewing them, you call them on the phone, you talk to them, you say, hey, you're so smart and so good, we really, really want you to review these applications for us. Okay, well, you'll get to see my slides after the fact. I won't go through them all again. Then once we identify these reviewers, my next job is to organize the review committee meeting, to get the reviewers together, to make sure they get all of their applications, they know what they have to do. And really my main job is, as I've been told, or as is told to all the SRAs, is I'm the expert at the table. I'm the federal government officer who runs the meeting and makes sure everything goes fairly and follows all of the legal rules and NIH-specific regulations. I think we want to skip that. NIH-specific regulations as far as how grants are reviewed and how we decide they're funded. www.jobs.nih.gov, and this is basically just a screen capture of the website. As I said, we had these administrative jobs, other jobs, and then these scientific research and clinical jobs. So again, the clinical jobs, we have these tenured senior investigators, tenure track investigators, and postdoctoral fellowships, kind of the classic scientific track that you think of. Then we have the scientific management and review, which is what I was speaking about now. We also have a class, I forgot about this, the biomedical researchers, where again these are microbiologists. Essentially these are non-tenure track scientists with master's degrees, PhD degrees, maybe even some BS degrees, who are technicians or advanced technicians. They're called staff scientists. They have lots of different names. So there are a lot of opportunities for people at various levels of your career to get positions at NIH actually doing bench science at the institutes. Okay, and then of course we also have a big, huge, the biggest research hospital in the world on campus, and so they also need lots of medical doctors, nurses, dentists, allied health professionals, and so on to see patients. Okay, so what can you do? Oh, I forgot about these slides. So this is what you can do at NIH with a bachelor's degree or a master's in microbiology. Technicians, they have lots of different names, but essentially they're technician positions. And the key difference here between master's and bachelor's is you get paid more with a master's degree. So if you have a master's degree, they'll pay you more money. So it's definitely worth thinking about getting a master's at least. There's not as many opportunities at NIAID in the extramural program, again, except for masters of public health and RNs, okay? With your PhD, of course, you can do a postdoc, staff scientists, lab chiefs. I think I went through all this. Program officers, but again, that's what Tom is. Scientific review administrator, me. For any of you here who might be thinking of attending medical school or are currently attending medical school or have, essentially you can do the same things you can do as a postdoc, with the added thing that you can also be what's known as a medical officer, the ones who actually make sure that in clinical trials that patients are treated correctly and all. So there are positions for that in the extramural program. Intramural research, as I already said, get a postdoc. Great place. I loved my time there. I think most of the postdocs I speak to who've been there love their time there. Of course, there is some variability in the lab you go in, but almost everybody I speak to says it was a great time there. Again, only a small percentage of available postdoc positions are actually advertised. And I told you about this. Expand your search besides NIAID. Look in all the other institutes, because there are, again, microbiologists all over the place. And tenure track positions, they're advertised just like any other university faculty position. Okay, extramural science administration. Health science administrators, scientific review administrator, me, program project officers, Tom, and then you have policy officers who determine policy as far as grant funding and what we can do and not do. In general, for extramural science administration, what you need is at least several years of postdoctoral experience to have a good shot at these jobs. Experience as a faculty member in academia or extensive experience in industry is even better. You know, that'll help you move ahead. But you don't have to have that experience to get these positions. So how did I get to where I am today? And I think that was kind of the purpose. That's what Anna said. One of the purposes of this was to discuss kind of my career path, and Tom will talk about his career path to get to where we are today. So I got a Bachelor of Science degree in biology at College of William and Mary in Virginia. I then got a PhD in microbiology at University of Maryland College Park. Took me 5 years, which seems to be pretty standard, I guess. Hopefully it's pretty standard. I don't think I took that long. It didn't seem like that long except near the end. Then it seems like it's a long time. Actually, they don't have a microbiology department there anymore. They have they've gotten one big biology department, but be that as it may, you don't actually have to have a microbiology degree. I then did a postdoc for 5 years at the National Cancer Institute in Susan Gottesman's lab, doing basic bacteriology, bacterial genetics, nothing to do with cancer. Never even had to think about cancer except what might have been in the water fountains or not. But as far as my work goes, there was no cancer involved. Then was an assistant and associate professor at the Medical University of Ohio for 8.5 years, essentially running my own lab, writing grants, writing papers, doing the kind of standard tenure track stuff that you think of for a professor at a medical school. And then about 1.5 years ago, there was a whole lot of reasons. People always ask me what the reasons are. I won't go through a lot of them. One thing, we wanted to move back east. And I was basically also interested in looking for something else to do. I had been doing research for, add all that up, for quite a long time. Research is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing the research. I enjoyed running my own lab. But I'm one of these kind of people who, after a while, I always like to think of what else different can I do. And as I was starting to look at positions back east, I found out about these SRA positions, which even though I had been sending people grants for years, I was really not that familiar with the jobs and what they did. But I heard about the SRA positions at NIAID, got more information, sent applications, applied for jobs, and eventually started working there about 1.5 years ago. And I haven't regretted going there. I really like being there. It's a really interesting, different view of the whole world of bacteriology, and I should say microbiology in general, because I get to work on all kinds of things besides bacteria. Okay. So I kind of said in briefly what an SRA does. You read grants and contracts that come in response usually to an RFA or an RFP they're called. I then have to recruit scientists and other professionals with appropriate expertise to review the application. So I have to be familiar enough with the applications and the science so that I know the people that need to review this for me, and that's why generally the more experience you have as a scientist, the better for these kind of positions. I organize and run the review meeting. I have to be very familiar with NIH policy, and as I said, I am the expert at the table. What else do we do? And probably one of the most important things we do is ensure that each application gets a thorough and fair review. I mean, there's a number of blurbs and things we say to reviewers all the time when we recruit them and at review meetings, but really that is the bottom line of this whole thing. We want a tough, thorough, but fair review of the application so that NIH in general, NIAID specifically, funds the best science that comes into us. Okay, I mean, whenever they talk about why science is so great in the United States compared to the rest of the world, one of the things you always hear them key in on is the fact that we do peer review of grants and contracts before awarding the money. We make sure the best people get funded, not just because it's your buddy or it's your cousin or it's your friend from graduate school. Okay, and then the next thing, so you need to have good writing skills also, and you need to like to write because after all the meeting's over, I have to write a summary of the discussion for each application. The reviewers write critiques. I have to then write a summary and say, look, this is what they liked about it, this is what they didn't like, and this is why you got the score they did. We don't really try to. Our job is not to help you rewrite your application, but we need to give you enough information so that if it didn't get funded the first time, you know the things you need to fix to rewrite it and resubmit it and hopefully get it funded the next time. Okay, now it's Tom's turn. He can tell you what he does as a program officer at NIAID.
Thanks, Darren. Well, Darren gave you a very nice overview of how the NIH the structure and how it works. I think the only reason he asked me to come by is to, again, give you a, describe how I got into this position where I am as a program officer in NIAID in the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases and what we do there. And then we'll probably just turn this over to kind of, oh, that's right, the movie. Oh, don't ever forget the propaganda.
It's a great movie. Make sure it's...
That I get where I am today. Just a little bio on me. I got my PhD in microbiology and immunology at Indiana University. Under Dr. Stan Spinola, we worked on the gram-negative bacterium Haemophilus ducreyi, which causes the sexually transmitted disease chancroid. I did a postdoc back where I kind of started, actually, graduate school at SUNY Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. It's kind of an extended postdoc, kind of like Darren's. After about 4 years, I became a research assistant professor. Started trying to write my own grants. Was never really successful at that. Kind of like Darren said, too, I just had a need to move to the Washington, D.C. area. My wife is also a scientist, and she was working for a small company in Buffalo, and that company went under. It lasted a little longer than some of the other small companies, but finally went under, and she actually got a position at a company down in Washington, D.C. in the northern Maryland suburbs near Bethesda. So I knew I needed to move down here. I was actually looking to switch gears too. I enjoyed the science very much. I enjoyed the research. I was looking for a change, and I have to be honest, I was actually looking for maybe an industry job or a small company job like my wife had. I thought that would be more appealing. It turns out that I knew an SRO in the NIAID, and I contacted him. I actually met him at the ASM a few years before and found out that he got a job at the NIAID. And so I just inquired with him as to what's going on there. It turns out this was in 2003, and that's when the NIAID got their first infusion of a large bunch of cash to support the emerging biodefense initiatives and networks. And so the way they decided to spend most of that money was to issue a large number of RFAs and RFPs, and these are specific requests for applications or proposals in the first couple of years. So it came to the SRAs at NIAID to put together all of those review meetings that had to review all those initial thousands of proposals and applications that came in to support the new biodefense initiatives. So they were really strapped for people, and I soared right in, got right in there. So I did that job for about 2.5 years. And then I moved to become a program officer at NIID. Now let's just go into the little basics of how the actual NIID is structured, a little bit more granularity than what Darren talked about. There's 4 divisions that make up the NIID. There's the Division of AIDS, the Division of Allergy and Immunology and Transplantation, the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, and blanking on and the Division of Extramural Affairs. Okay, and then there's a separate division. It's not really an official division, but it's the New Vaccine Research Center. Is basically considered its own division. So within a division is made up of several branches, and all those branches are based on scientific discipline. So within the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, there are several branches. One is the virology branch, one is the bacteria and mycology branch, and I happen to be in the STI branch, the sexually transmitted infections branch. So when that position became available, having my background on STDs, I thought it would be an excellent place to go. My next slide. I forget what my next. So what does a PO do? So I think the best way to talk about what as a PO or program officer does is to go through the life of a grant. Basically, you send in a grant to the CSR, the Center for Scientific Review. That's where everybody has to send their grants. There's a referral office that reads your grant and decides, number one, which institute that grant belongs to, and then which portfolio or which branch and which actual program officer is best suited for that actual application. So as soon as that process is finished, if you send in a grant that's on basic research in STDs, let's say you're working on chlamydia, that my name will get associated with your grant because it's coming to my portfolio. This is even before any review or anything of that nature. What they also do in the referral office is they take your grant and decide which study section best fits the review of that. In this case is an R01 grant. And so it gets sent to that study section, and that's where you get your review. So after the review, you get what's called the summary statement. And that'll have your critiques and the resume that the SRA prepares, and that's what Darren does. And then on the top of that summary statement will be your program officer's name. So that's all calibrated into it. It's all associated from the very beginning when it first came. They're your main scientific liaison between yourself, the investigator, and the NIAID/NIH, or for any other center or institute that you might apply to. And so they're your go-to person, and you start the relationship. If you don't get the funding, if you miss the funding line, the best thing to do is to call your program officer. And as a program officer, you wait for these calls to come in, and they tend to pile up after the specific cycles. There's 3 cycles in the NIH funding year. And I have to say, you usually get most of the calls are for people who don't make the funding line and want to know how to improve or how to deal with certain critiques. So that's pretty much what I do on a day-to-day basis is interact with principal investigators on any aspect of their application post-review. Now, if they get there, if they make the funding line, we work with the grants management specialist to actually get the money out to them. And then, again, the relationship continues because throughout that life of that grant, they're the main person, the PO is the main person that a principal investigator calls to help them out with any issues they might have with their grant. One of the biggest issues we always have is if somebody wants to change institutions. Right? So you're directly involved in what some people might seem like mundane administrative work, but for every bit of some of the mundane switching institutions, you can get into some really neat stuff where someone has a great observation and they need to maybe get some extra funding, or they need to expand out, submit a new grant. So you're always working in a very close relationship with the people in what's called my portfolio, all the R01s that are existing. Again, we maintain a portfolio of grants on a specific scientific discipline. That's what I do. And we're in charge of interpreting and publicizing NIH and NIID policy. I know Darren told you there are policy officers whose main job is to develop the policy and make sure it's implemented, and make sure it's implemented in a fair way. And but again, since the program officer is really the interface between the principal investigator and the NIH, it's very important that the PO has to keep up with all the current policies. One of the biggest things that happened just recently was the change in human subjects policy, so whether you're truly using human subjects in your grant application. It's very good if you're a program officer, if you keep track of those things, because those are the types of questions young investigators or any investigator tries to ask you before they actually submit their grant. So we help people with that. Anytime if there's special qualifications for, say, a given announcement, whether there's gaps on how much the award is, or whether there's a narrow group of people that the announcement is targeting. As long as you stay on top of those things, you could really try to help those people out to make it easier on their end. The other biggest thing is the electronic grant submission, which is occurring now and coming down the pike for some of the main grants. We're going to get a lot of questions on that. So again, you're on the front lines, and you have to know who you can refer people to, because sometimes there's a division between what a program officer and, say, an SRA advice can give, and sometimes it's better to refer them back to the SRA for a given administrative review problem. I am a program officer at the moment, but because I deal with grants. If I became the executor of a government contract, and a government contract is separate from a grant. A grant is an assistant mechanism. We assist the researcher in their science. If the government wants to purchase something, that's called a contract. The proposals are submitted, and proposals are awarded with a contract. There always needs to be a scientific liaison, even with an NIH contract. So a program officer can always become what's called a project officer. I know it doesn't sound like much to you, but there is a difference. As a project officer, you're the main person on the scientific side who executes and monitors the lifetime of a contract. Make sure they're delivering all the goods that they swore they would deliver when they got awarded the money. As a PO, you work with SRAs and other policy officers, but mainly in the program office does it originate the development of RFAs and RFPs and all other NIH solicitations. So, as Darren said, if there is a scientific need, if we needed to push, say, for example, I felt, or my branch felt, that we needed to push the science more into the direction of, say, Trichomonas vaginalis, which is an underrepresented disease in my portfolio, possibly we could develop an RFA that would be a request for applications, which would be explicitly soliciting the request applications on this particular disease, and then those would be sent into the NIAID, and they would be reviewed by someone like Darren. And I think that's about it. We do have I was just standing there at the NIAID recruitment booth. You want me to talk about that? There is an opening for SRAs. I believe is the job opening on the web right now? Can you apply?
I don't know.
No.
I don't know. I think most of the positions that are at the booth now are as contractors, that is SRAs who work for somebody else who then have them work for us. And in fact, that's something I didn't mention. That's also kind of a common career path in a lot of these places, is you get a job with an independent contractor like someone like SAIC or LTS or some of these others. They hire you out to us. And then there's no guarantee, but then usually, I shouldn't say usually, there's no guarantee, but then possibly after a year or so, if a federal government position opens at NIH, then you could get hired on as a federal government SRA. But that's another way. It's very common. I think weren't you a contractor for, yeah, I think Tom was a contractor for about a year or so before he came in full-time as a federal employee. But in any case, those are the jobs being advertised at the booth right now. But if you go to that website, and in fact, I just said, I'm not going to show the movie. If you really want to see the movie, you can go to the booth and see it, because it's already 20 minutes of. But if you go to that website and just do some simple searches for jobs for microbiologists, you'll get a good idea of all the different opportunities that are there, the requirements and the duties. And I would say just check it every once in a while and see what's available. That's kind of the best way to learn about the jobs that are available at NIH.
Yeah, the only thing I have to add is that it's good that Darren and I are here. After your postdoc and you're looking for a job as an extramural administrator in the NIH, really the program officer and the SRA are the entry-level jobs that really you would probably be looking at, and they both can come under the guise of the health science administrator. So that's a key to look for when you're searching usajobs.gov is the health science administrator. If you look at the description might tell you whether it's a review job or a program job, because I think basically what we tried to communicate here today is that there'll be a lot of things about review and setting up panels in the review job and working with principal investigators on the program side.
So, any questions from anybody about what we spoke about today? No? Everybody going to run to booth 915 then and get information? I don't think they're giving away any stuff good, so don't run there for that. Oh, yes? So, that's a good question. So a staff scientist, if you come in as a staff scientist, you're a federal government employee, so it's hard to get rid of you. So you're really, for the most part, tenured once you've been there a year. You don't run your own lab, okay? You are there as a technician. You might, again, have a different title, but essentially you're a technician. You work in somebody else's lab who's a tenure track or tenured person there, okay? So that's kind of the key difference is you don't get paid as much, and you're not the boss. You get told what to do rather than deciding your own direction. Although that's going to vary quite a lot between labs. I'm sure there are staff scientists out there who get a lot more freedom as far as what they do in the lab from their boss. Does that answer your question?
Is there a different application process for a tenured versus non-tenured staff? I'm sure you're going to get the answers as well. For example, if one wanted to apply for tenured versus non-tenured.
So for the staff scientist jobs, the non-tenured jobs, they would all be on the USA Jobs site. For tenure track jobs, they're going to be advertised in like Science and Nature and ASM News, things like that, as faculty positions. They're essentially like faculty positions. So that would be the difference as far as looking for one or the other.
I know that it's a kind of strange question, but there are also possibilities for people that are not permanent resident or citizen.
Yes, there are. With everything, that makes everything more difficult if you're not a citizen or a permanent resident. But in fact, we have people who work in our program who are not citizens. I think by now they're probably permanent residents because they've been there a while. But there are opportunities for people who are not citizens or permanent residents. Everything's just a little more difficult. But if you're qualified and you have the expertise we need, that's what we look for first.
It's not, of course, not a criterion from the review. Just an administrative problem.
Right, well, yeah, because essentially, I guess, unless you're a permanent resident, you can't be hired as a federal employee, as a GS employee. You have to be hired under a different system, and I don't understand it myself, but there are ways to hire you. Again, if you have the background we want, then they'll work out a way to hire you.